What kind of mother sells the only roof over her head just so her children can dream? Miriam had nothing, no job, no husband, no family support, just 2 children and an unshakable belief in their future. While others laughed, she signed away the house her late father built, choosing hunger over regret. Years passed, and then something unimaginable happened. One child disappeared. The other rose. What happened next silenced an entire village. Before you judge or sacrifice, watch till the end. This story will break you and build you. The sun in McKinney town scorched the dusty roads as if heaven itself was punishing the earth. Inside a crumbling one-room shack, Miriam, wrapped in a worn-out anchor cloth, clutched her 2-month-old son Abdul and her 4-year-old daughter Hawa. Her lips were dry. She hadn't eaten in over a day, and her breast milk had dried up like a riverbed in a drought. Hawa's stomach grumbled, and Abdul's whimper was barely louder than the whisper of the wind. Miriam stared at the cracked ceiling. God, she murmured, please, not today. She waited. Her husband, Baco, had left at dawn without a word or glance. She thought he was out looking for work, but hours had passed and still no sign. The only person she could think to turn to was her childhood friend, Aisha, who lived 2 blocks away. With shaky legs, she tied Abdul to her back, held Hawa's hand, and stepped into the burning street. Miriam's breath was shallow. Just enough for food, she whispered to herself. Just enough to keep them breathing. Miriam knocked gently on Aisha's door, her hands trembling. No answer. She knocked again. Still silence. The door was ajar. Aisha, she called out softly, stepping in. Then, from the inner room, she heard laughter, low, familiar, and painful. Her heart skipped. Carefully, she tiptoed forward and peeked into the bedroom. There, reclining on the bed, half naked, was Baco, drinking soft drink and chewing roasted meat, with Aisha, wrapped in nothing but a short towel. The air in Miriam's chest left her body like a punch to the lungs. Baco's eyes met Miriam's. No shame, only irritation. Why are you entering like a lunatic? He barked. Aisha didn't bother to cover herself. She smirked. Haven't you learned how to knock? Miriam clutched her baby and whispered, Our children are hungry. I came to ask Aisha for help. Baco stood. You and those kids are a burden. 2 children, no sons, and no future. The doctor said your womb is useless. You're just dead weight. Miriam's knees buckled. Aisha sipped her drink and added, Be grateful he stayed this long. The cries of her baby filled the silence as Miriam backed away from the room, numb. I came for help, she said quietly, not for heartbreak. Baco scoffed. Tell God to feed you then. With no words left, Miriam turned and stepped into the street, her world spinning. Each footstep burned on the hot ground, but inside her, something ignited. That day, under the unforgiving sun, Miriam made a vow. I will raise these children alone. Even if I must sell this roof, I will give them a life worth living. Miriam returned home with swollen feet and a heart heavier than a river stone. Hawa was too weak to speak. Abdul's cry had become a whimper. She laid him down on a thin mat and looked around the room. A torn curtain, a broken pot, a sack of nothing. She closed the door and slid down to the floor, burying her face in her palms. No food, no husband, no money, only a mother's love and the sound of 2 children breathing weakly beside her. God, she whispered again, don't let them die before my eyes. With dawn came resolve. Miriam tied a scarf on her head, wore the cleanest dress she had left, and carried Hawa on her hip while Abdul remained strapped to her back. She walked to the town market, not to buy, but to beg. Every eye on her felt like a dagger. "Please," she said to a fruit seller, "just one banana for my child." The woman looked at her with pity, then turned away. "You again?" another shouted. "Go beg your husband." The shame swallowed her, but she stood still. "Then spit on me," she said, "but let my child eat." Just as she was about to turn back, defeated, a wrinkled old man named Baba Tanko, dressed in faded kaftan, walked over. He didn't say a word. He handed her a small nylon bag of rice, 2 sachets of milk, and a bottle of water. Miriam's lips quivered. "Why?" she asked. Baba Tanko smiled faintly. "Because no woman should beg to keep her children alive." Miriam fell to her knees, sobbing. The crowd watched in silence. For the first time in days, she felt human again. That small act lit a fire she didn't know she had left. That night, Miriam didn't sleep. She sat upright beside her children, watching them eat in tiny bites. Her mind was racing. She thought of skills she once had. How she used to weave baskets with her grandmother. How she once braided girls' hair in secondary school for lunch money. "If I die," she muttered, "let it be with my hands covered in work, not tears." She tore an old wrapper into strips and began weaving. Her fingers were slow and clumsy, but her heart was steady. She was no longer waiting to be rescued. She was rising. Morning came. Miriam carried 5 rough baskets she had finished overnight. She set them on a mat outside the market gate. "Handmade by mother," she whispered to passers-by. Most ignored her. Some laughed. But one young woman stopped, picked up a basket, and smiled. "You made this?" Miriam nodded. "How much?" the girl asked. "Anything you can spare." The girl gave her 500 naira, more than the basket was worth. By afternoon, she sold 3. She bought Gary beans and small palm oil. She didn't smile, but her eyes did. That night, Miriam sat in silence after feeding her children. She took a torn school book she had found by the roadside days earlier and began to write, not for anyone else, just for herself. Day 11. I made 1,200 naira. Howell laughed for the first time in 2 weeks. Abdul slept without crying. Her handwriting was crooked, trembling, but each letter was her way of documenting survival. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a warrior keeping score of every battle won, no matter how small. The next morning, just as Miriam prepared to leave the market, a familiar voice called out behind her shack. It was Baba Tanko again. This time, he wasn't alone. His daughter, Auntie Khadija, had followed him. "You said she weaves?" the woman asked. Miriam nodded nervously. "Let me see." When Khadija examined the baskets, her eyes widened. "You have gold in your fingers, woman," she said. "How many can you make in a week?" Miriam stammered. 20, maybe." Khadija smiled. "Then I want 30. I run a boutique in Abuja." Joy had entered Miriam's home, but with it came pressure. 30 baskets in 1 week? She barely had enough material. She worked till her fingers bled. Hawa felt ill again from cold nights. Abdul cried for her attention, but she could only hum to him as she worked. Sleep became a luxury. Her back ached. Her eyes burned. But she didn't stop. Every knot was a prayer, every weave a cry. She whispered to herself, "God, just carry me till Friday." It wasn't about money anymore. It was about proving she could rise. On Thursday night, with her eyes nearly shut from fatigue, Miriam completed the 30th basket. She looked at them, each one better than the last. Then, before dawn, she bathed her children, dressed them in their cleanest clothes, and carried the baskets to the same spot she had once begged for food. When Auntie Khadija arrived in a small car, she was stunned. "You did it," she whispered. Miriam simply nodded, unable to speak from exhaustion. Khadija opened the trunk and helped her load them in. "Let's talk business," she said. Inside the car, Khadija handed Miriam an envelope. "Advance payment," she said. Miriam opened it slowly. 10 crisp 1,000 naira notes, more than she had ever held at once. Her breath caught in her throat. "You deserve more, and I'll pay more next time," Khadija added. As she stepped out of the car and walked back home, Miriam didn't run. She didn't dance. She walked quietly, with tears trailing down her cheeks. Not out of sorrow, but out of the disbelief that her pain had finally opened a door, and behind that door was dignity. Word spread. The woman who used the bag now had buyers. Some neighbors cheered her. Others scoffed, whispering behind her back, "She must be sleeping with that boutique woman," or, "Let's see how long it lasts." Miriam heard every whisper, but instead of letting the pain weigh her down, she turned it into fire. She began rising before dawn, teaching how to sort raffia and letting Abdul nap on her back as she worked. If the world doubted her, let them watch her build a life with bare hands. Just as things seemed to be settling, the sky turned black one afternoon. A sudden downpour flooded the area. The baskets, her next batch, were soaked. The small shed she used for drying collapsed in the storm. Miriam stood in the rain, her heart heavy, her hands trembling as she watched the raffia float in dirty water. Hawa cried. Abdul sneezed from the cold. She wanted to scream, but instead, she picked up what remained and laid it out in the little sunlight that followed. "I will not break," she whispered. That weekend, Miriam took some of her half-dried baskets to the local market. She wasn't trying to sell them, just hoping someone would want one, flaws and all. That's when she met Mama Ngozi, an older trader who sold herbs. The woman studied Miriam's work and said, "This is good work, but the finish needs more strength." She didn't mock her. She taught her. Right there, beside a pile of dried roots, Miriam learned new weaving techniques. Mama Ngozi even gave her better raffia. No charge. You or me many years ago. That night, after dinner, Hawa tugged gently at her mother's wrapper. "Mama," she said softly, "when will we live in a house with a roof that doesn't leak?" Miriam froze. The child hadn't said it with complaint, only hope. She knelt, holding Hawa's face. "One day soon, my daughter, you see these hands." She raised her rough palms. "They will build that house. Maybe not tomorrow, but someday." Hawa smiled and nodded, as if she believed her mama could move mountains. And in that moment, Miriam started believing it too. A week later, a van pulled up near Miriam's home. Out stepped Khadija, with a man in glasses beside her. "This is Mr. Bamadil," she said. "He's a distributor. He wants to see your work." Miriam's heart pounded. She laid out her new, improved baskets. Mr. Bamadil turned them over, inspecting every edge. "You could supply my stores across 3 cities, if you can maintain this quality," he said. Miriam blinked in disbelief. She had no warehouse, no staff, just her hands. But something inside her whispered, "Say yes." And she did. The community held a gathering that weekend. Miriam was invited, not as a spectator, but as a contributor. For the first time, she wasn't sitting in the back corner with bowed shoulders. She walked to the center, shoulders straight, baskets in hand. She spoke with clarity about how weaving had helped her stand again. Some clapped, some wept. One elder whispered, "We judged too soon." Her voice trembled, but she finished with a promise. "I will train any woman who wants to learn. No one should feel as helpless as I once did." As orders started coming in from the distributor, Miriam's nights grew longer. She wove till her fingers ached and bled. Abdul often fell asleep at her feet. Hawa stayed up to count finished baskets. Miriam had no workers, only willpower. Some nights, she nodded off mid-weave, waking with a start, afraid of failing. But each time she completed a set, she whispered, "Thank you," to the ceiling above her leaky roof, to the God who didn't forget her, what she lacked in comfort. She poured into every strand of raffia. One morning, Miriam woke up to find Hawa packing the baskets herself, labeling them with old cardboard she cut into neat squares. "We have to be faster, Mama," the little girl said with a quiet seriousness. She had even listed all the colors they used, naming them like a professional. Miriam stared, overwhelmed. She saw not just her daughter, but a future businesswoman, a helper, a force. For the first time in her life, she wept from joy, pulling Hawa into her arms. "You are more than my child," she whispered. "You are my strength." Trouble returned one dusty afternoon. Her ex-husband, Usman, appeared at her doorstep. His eyes scanned the compound. Baskets everywhere, children healthy, a woman transformed. "You've changed," he said, almost as if it irritated him. Miriam stood tall. "You left us in ashes. I built this from what was left." He stammered, "I came to see the children." She let them say hello, but from a distance. When he offered money, she shook her head. "We don't take from those who abandon fire and return in sunshine." That day, she reclaimed her dignity. With her first real profit, Miriam didn't buy jewelry or clothes. She paid a carpenter to build a proper drying shed and commissioned a young artist to paint a signboard, "Hawa baskets, woven with grace." The whole community gathered to watch it go up. Some clapped. Others looked stunned. But Miriam, she just smiled. Her journey wasn't finished, but the worst parts were behind her. As the sun set behind a new signboard, she whispered again, not to the world, but to herself, "I am no longer shadow." Weeks later, a woman from the city arrived at Miriam's compound. She wore linen clothes and carried a leather bag. "I represent a boutique in Abuja," she said. "Your baskets are selling faster than we expected. We want to feature you in a magazine." Miriam blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. Abdul dropped his ball in shock. Hawa whispered, "Mama, you're famous?" The woman smiled. "You're not just a mother, Miriam. You're a brand." That night, Miriam didn't sleep. She sat under the stars and wept. Tears not of pain, but disbelief. Just as blessings poured in, disaster struck. It rained for 3 days, and the house could no longer bear it. The roof, patched many times, finally gave way. Water rushed in, soaking baskets, toppling tools, wetting their only mattress. Miriam screamed and rushed to cover her children with her body. Neighbors came running. Hawa cried, "Mama, everything is broken." Miriam, drenched and shivering, whispered, "No, only the roof is broken. We are not." That night, they slept at the neighbors', and by morning, the village had begun gathering sticks and zinc. Amidst the stress of rebuilding, Hawa began to cough. At first, Miriam brushed it off as fatigue. But one night, her fever soared, and she began to convulse. Panic. Miriam ran barefoot to the local clinic, screaming for help. The nurse frowned. She's dehydrated, and it's likely pneumonia. Hours passed. Miriam sat on the cold floor of the waiting room, rocking back and forth, muttering prayers. She was no longer afraid of poverty, but of losing her child. When the doctor finally said, "She's stable now," Miriam collapsed into the chair, trembling. Word of Howe's illness spread. Women she had once trained showed up at the hospital, baskets of food in hand. At night, outside the hospital, they lit small lanterns and formed a prayer circle. They sang soft hymns in Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. Miriam walked out and froze. These were the same women who once crossed the street to avoid her. Now they knelt for her. As they sang, Miriam fell to her knees too. "This," she whispered, "is what healing looks like." Her heart cracked open with gratitude as tears rolled down her chin. A week later, Howell walked out of the hospital, weaker but smiling. The sun lit her face as if heaven approved. She turned to her mother and said, "Mama, I will build you a house one day, a big one, with no leaks." Miriam laughed through her tears. "You're already building me a new life," she replied. That evening, they returned to a rebuilt home, patched by love, not money. Inside, baskets waited patiently, and Miriam whispered to them, "Let's begin again, because healing is not a destination. It's a rhythm." 3 weeks later, a radio van from the state capitol pulled into the village. They were doing a segment called Women Who Inspire. A local teacher had nominated Miriam. She was invited to speak on air. At first, she declined. "I don't speak perfect English," she whispered. The producer smiled. "But your story speaks louder than language." On air, Miriam told her story of betrayal, hunger, children, and baskets. By the end, the radio host was in tears. So were the listeners. Messages flooded in. "She sounds like my mother. She gave me hope." The broadcast reached the governor's wife. Moved, she sent her team to find Miriam. Days later, black SUVs rolled into the village. For the first time, people bowed to greet Miriam, not just the men in suits. They presented a plaque, a check, and an invitation to Lagos for a women's empowerment summit. Miriam's hands shook as she received them. She had never left her village. "What if I embarrass myself?" she asked. Her daughter whispered, "Mama, you taught me to stand. Now stand." For the first time, Miriam stood tall, not just in body, but in soul. The morning of her departure to Lagos, the entire village came to the bus stop. Miriam wore the only new dress she owned, a gift from the same neighbors who once mocked her. Abdul carried her small bag, smiling wide. Howell wore her mother's scarf like a crown. As the bus pulled in, Miriam looked at her children, her hut, her baskets. "Mama," Howell said, "go and tell the world what you survived." Miriam boarded with tears in her eyes. She wasn't just going to Lagos. She was stepping into the pages of her destiny. Lagos was a storm of lights, noise, and motion. Miriam stared in awe at tall buildings and billboards. At the hotel, she touched the bed as if it would disappear. "Mama," her roommate at the summit said, "you belong here." During the event, Miriam stood before hundreds of women. Her voice trembled, then steadied. She spoke not just of poverty, but of rising, not just of survival, but of rebirth. Women wept. Some stood. One shouted, "You are the mother we all need." Miriam smiled. She had finally found her voice. That night in the hotel, Miriam found a letter in her bag, written in pencil by Howell. It read, "Mama, I used to be afraid of the world, but watching you, I believe in it again. You are my hero. You didn't just survive, you showed us how to live. Come back home and teach me to be like you." Miriam cried silently on the hotel bed, holding the letter against her chest. The city had shown her her power. but her child's words reminded her why she ever fought in the first place. When Miriam stepped off the bus back in the village, it felt like a queen returning home. The same villagers who once watched her walk barefoot now sang and danced. She didn't come back with riches, but with vision. In her bag were plans, contacts, and a renewed fire. I went to Lagos as Miriam the widow. I returned as Miriam the builder, she declared. Children ran to hug her. The chief offered her a plot of land. Start something, he said. Let the women follow you. Weeks passed. Miriam transformed the gifted plot into a makeshift skill center, roof with bamboo, floor with earth. Women gathered with curiosity. She taught them basket weaving, natural soap making, and how to sell to city boutiques. You don't need saving, she told them. You need remembering of who you are. Laughter filled the air where silence once lived. Howard became her assistant. Abdul drew signs in charcoal. A seed had become a tree. A tree was becoming a forest. One day, an old woman approached the center, face worn by decades of silence. I was once a wife, too, she whispered, until he left. Miriam embraced her, then start again with us. Slowly, women began bringing their daughters. Girls who once dropped out of school were now learning to earn. Miriam didn't just give skills. She gave identity. What broke us was silence, she said during a local gathering. What heals us is community. The center was no longer just a building. It was a womb. A national news station came to cover her story. Cameras captured her walking through the center, touching every woman's shoulder, smiling with pride. On air, the interviewer asked, "Do you see yourself as a hero?" Miriam paused. "I see myself as a scar, and scars don't mean you're broken. They mean you healed." The clip went viral. She became the face of rural strength. Foundations reached out. Offers came. But Miriam stayed rooted. "I don't need a title," she said. "Just give me more baskets to fill." One evening, the women surprised Miriam with a celebration. Lanterns lit the night. Food was shared. Songs were sung. As she sat beneath the stars, Howell whispered, "Mama, do you see? You made this from ashes." Miriam smiled, then looked across the field where fireflies danced like spirits. "We were never meant to stay broken," she said. "Even fireflies carry their own light." That night, the village sang a new song, a song not of sorrow, but of rebirth. One morning, a man in fine clothes arrived at the center. He stood quietly watching the women work. It was Alhaji Danjuma, the very man who once called Miriam a burden. But now, his daughter was among the learners. "You trained her," he said softly. "You made her strong." Miriam looked at him without bitterness. No, she chose strength. I only reminded her it was hers. He removed his cap, humbled. "I judged a woman, but you raised a nation." They shook hands beneath the same sun that once scorched her. Abdul now stood taller than Miriam, his hands calloused from building tables for the center. Hawa taught younger girls how to speak English and sell their products. One night, they gathered by a fire. "Mama," Abdul began, "I want to build a proper school here in your name." Miriam's eyes welled. "Don't build it in my name," she whispered. "Build it for the girls like Hawa who were told they couldn't rise." A dream had planted itself in the hearts of her children. The future was shifting. Years later, the village had changed. There was now a proper school, a market, and even a small clinic, all sparked by Miriam Center. But Miriam, she sat quietly beneath the old baobab tree, watching the world she helped shape. Villagers would come to sit at her feet, not for goods, but for wisdom. "Mama Miriam," they called her. "Tell us again how you survived." And she'd smile. "I didn't just survive. I redefined what living meant. Her voice became a well, deep, enduring, and full of life. One dawn, Abdul found a letter on Miriam's bed, beside her folded wrapper and her favorite prayer beads. She had passed in her sleep with a smile. The letter read, "To my children and to every girl who walks barefoot today, your pain is not your ending. It is your beginning. Build, love, rise. And when the world tries to bury you, remember, even seeds grow in the dark." The camera pulls back, rising over the village where the morning sun kisses the rooftops. The story of Miriam, the widow, the warrior, the mother of light, lives on. Miriam's story isn't just hers. It belongs to every woman who dared to rise, every child who found light in the dark, and every soul still waiting to be heard. If this story moved you, let her legacy continue. And if you believe in the power of untold African stories, subscribe to our channel at Echoes Africa Stories. Tap the bell so you never miss a heartbeat from our continent's soul. Because stories like Miriam deserve to echo forever.